According to a recent survey, the number of white-collar contract workers across Southern Africa is booming. With such a large percentage of the workforce now mobile, what does this mean from a data risk perspective? That's the question, and to share his answers, I'm joined by Simon McCullough, Channel Manager at Citrix South Africa. Simon, welcome.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, in the business context,
Yes.
What's the value of a research study like this for businesses out there?
I think this has shown us the importance and the challenges that customers are facing when employing contract workers from a intellectual property perspective and how they secure their data and their applications.
Now, when we look at the numbers, that number of contract workers is rising. Companies need to be lean and mean given post-recessionary environment.
Yes.
From a statistics perspective, what are the numbers looking like?
We see quite a large number of contract workers being used in IT the sector, primarily from a projects perspective. And that we see as a result of skills shortage in the industry. With other organizations in public sector is rather small. Most of the contract workers are used from a HR perspective, but we do see that rise happening across the industries.
Now, if you say to me that the majority comes from the IT sector because of that skills deficit, does that also mean that the number of people making the mistake and not handling the data and the security perspective are the IT folks as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The research has shown that majority of organizations do not cut remote access to a user's rights once they leave the organization. So they're opening themselves up to a can of worms. We're seeing that a lot of organizations have a fear of how data is controlled, but yet they do not find cloud storage to be a fear or a concern for them. They should read those disclaimers to see what the concerns actually are.
Now, does it come down to lack of policy or lack of policy implementation?
I think it's a bit of both. A number of organizations do not have the correct policies in place. A lot of those organizations do not have NDAs or non-disclosure agreements for the contract workers. They have non-disclosure agreements for their permanent staff, but not for the contract workers. We're also seeing that the correct policies aren't in place to control what happens to the data, where it is accessed from, and what the user can do with it.
Now, before we get into the actual findings of the survey is South Africa based.
Absolutely.
But are we seeing similar trends internationally?
Definitely. I think what we're seeing, though, is that South Africa is 2 years behind where the rest of the world is, especially from a BYO, bring your own perspective. And so a lot of organizations overseas have already invested in the bring your own policy. So they've got these policies in place already to control what happens to data and devices.
From an IT and a data perspective, the human factor seems to be the biggest risk. I mean, you have internal risks with a permanent staff complement who understand or who know about the policies and procedures. If you have this contract and this mobile workforce, how do you mitigate some of that risk?
So you would be mitigating that risk by centralizing your applications, centralize your data. We need to make sure that we have the correct policies and procedures in place that scan devices. We need to make sure that devices meet certain corporate standards. We also need to make sure that a user is accessing in a certain way, and then we can control how the data is delivered with the applications to the device. It's extremely important that we control how that data is accessed to ensure that users do not take that data off our corporate network and get it onto devices or into cloud storage that they shouldn't be getting it into.
Who does the responsibility fall to, though? Because you always look to the IT department, but should it not be a top-down, bottom-up approach as well?
I think it's both. And I think responsibility also needs to fall on the HR department. They're extremely pivotal in making sure that these policies are delivered correctly.
Now, there are some companies who carry very sensitive information. We're looking at the banking sectors, some of the auditing firms.
Yes.
That you have those policies and procedures, but are companies investing in having those contract workers and mobile workers signing non-disclosure agreements?
Majority of them, we found that from the survey, 79% of contract workers sign an NDA of some form. So 21% of those organizations are leaving themselves open for a can of worms.
All right, let's look at some of the stats.
Yes.
You mentioned a quarter of organizations don't terminate contractors' remote access. Does that include things like access cards as well?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. This, as far as I'm concerned, is from a remote access from VPNing into the organization. It's access to email, access to file shares, etc.
All right, at least 35% of consultants were encouraged to use their own device. You mentioned bring your own device.
Yes.
In an environment where we see multiple platforms, we see the introduction of BlackBerry into the system, platforms like Apple and the rest, how do you keep the data storage safe from that perspective when each security policies differ?
Very good question. I think it's a number of approaches. First of all, we need to make sure that we've got decent mobile device management in place to look after this proliferation of devices in our organization. We also need to make sure that we can centrally host and deliver applications through Citrix technologies. And then look at, if you're going to be doing follow me data, you need to make sure that your data is protected, and we will be able to offer you some on-premise storage zones for control of and delivery of data onto those devices.
Simon, now out of all the findings of the survey, which did you find most interesting and what did you not expect?
I expected more of a concern around cloud storage. I was quite surprised to see that only 10% saw that cloud storage was a bit of a risk for them.
Because cloud is the fashionable term in IT and ICT these days.
Absolutely. But I don't think a lot of organizations realize that once you take cloud storage into place and you put your data into the cloud, you no longer have control over it. Once it's left your corporate network, it's gone.
Some food for thought. Simon McCullough, thank you very much.
Thank you.